Hey, it's Mazzy. Welcome back. Talking Heads, 1977, their debut album on Sire Records. Seymour Stein really wanted them. They were kind of referred to as the intellectual of the punk bands, of the new wave bands, the whole CBGB scene. I want to really do a whole video on these New York bands. I mean, that was an amazing time in New York. Nothing like that since the Greenwich Village folk scene in the early to mid 60s. It was incredible seeing it. I first went to New York in 1978. I didn't go to CBGB's, my biggest mistake. I did go later in the 80s, but this period is a special time in New York. So I really envy those people that saw those bands and saw them at the beginning there in New York at that venue. Now, I saw a lot of those bands as they toured San Francisco. And my first live Talking Heads show was, I think, around December of 1977 at the Keystone Berkeley. They played around the Bay Area at a few venues. And then I saw them again in 1978 at the boarding house on Bush Street, and I'll tell you about that a little bit. But this is a new reissue, an expanded reissue of the debut album from 1977. Which is an amazing album, actually. And, you know, it's funny, I haven't listened to it in a while from start to finish. And I did listen to this entire set. I blasted it. And then I listened to my original Sire Records release from 1977, my record store days. Look at this wonderful record. Just so simple. They wanted to make sure that it stood out in the record bins there. I think they wanted to do a Dayglow color to begin with, but budget-wise, they couldn't do that. But I learned that reading the book here. I read these books when I get wonderful expanded editions. Now, this is really a well-done set. It was produced by the A&R Rhino producer, Jason Jones, who I've spoke to on this channel in the past because of his releases of expanded sets of The Replacements, as well as Little Feat, two of my favorite bands. And of course, Talking Heads is a favorite of mine. And again, as I said, I'm fortunate enough to see them in the early days. I never saw them when they were a trio, prior to Jerry Harrison joining the group just before the recording of this record. But I forgot how wonderful of a recording this record actually is. Produced by Tony Bongiovi, and I had no idea that he's the cousin of John Bon Jovi. Is that his name? John, the rock and roller, right? Those Jersey guys, man. Lance Quinn also, and the Talking Heads. And engineered by Ed Stasium, who writes an essay in this book and worked with a lot of other great bands. And this is a great record. And I also forgot, I don't know, this memory thing, because for some reason over the years I've been listening to the later, mid-period later records when they bring in more, African sounding rhythms and things and expanded. And I love their entire catalog. They have an amazing, just really a unique and creative catalog. And I love how, they come from the Rhode Island School of Design, at least three of the members, I guess. They just really have this artsy thing again, which is wonderful, and it's showcased in their later workings with Brian Eno, as well as their cover art and David Byrne's direction. A little more in that, but it is a really a group effort here. And it dispels any rumors that Tina Weymouth didn't play all the bass parts. They brought in a bass player. The producer did do some things, play around, do some things. They didn't use them, and it's all Tina on here. So the booklet on here, there's a different multi-page discussion of memories of each of the four members of Talking Heads, talking about the recording of this album, leading up to this album, and their memory of it, as well as Ed Stasium as the engineer, his memory of it too. There's a wonderful book here, which I'll do some cutaways so you can kind of see within the book. But this particular package, again, has the proper album remastered. It then has a wonderful disc 2 of Rarities. Now, I've never gotten any of the expanded other versions of Talking Head things, so I don't know how much of this stuff has been released before. I will admit that it's not in my my worldly experience of knowing rarities and outtakes, expanded type issues. But then it has a live CBGB New York set of October 77, which would have been maybe a month and a half before I saw them. And they are friggin' tight in this record. You realize how tight they were as a band at that time. You think of some of these bands, whether it's Television, which is actually one of the better bands too of the day, but the Dead Boys and a lot of the bands were pretty sloppy. Of course, the year before this, Sire recorded and released the first Ramones album, and it has a was a big influence in what was happening in all these other bands and people like Seymour Stein from Sire Records going and trying to get all these bands. They did get the Dead Boys. Blondie came out of that scene as well. Patti Smith, just amazing group of artists that have really crossed over in the commercial world. Obviously, there's a few. Television really didn't get as commercial, but Blondie, probably the biggest. Patti Smith, the Talking Heads, big as well. Not so much the Dead Boys and some of the other bands there. Again, I'm not doing a complete overview in this video. And then there is a Blu-ray which has a high-res stereo and Atmos. And I did listen to that, not in surround, just to kind of get a feel for it. And on my system, I have an Oppo 205 and a Hagel H390 amp and BMW S702 S3 speakers. And this thing sounded really good. I didn't really, in my system, hear an improvement of the high-res Blu-ray audio over the CDs. But I tell you, the remastered CDs sounded really good, really dynamic. And again, I pumped it up. I mean, and it's just a really wonderful sounding CD. And going, from playing records all day before I started listening to this, and I went through it a couple times, to this, it wasn't the shock of the new CD format going back 40 years, right? But sometimes when I'm playing records and I go back and forth between the formats, I really hear the difference. And I am one. As much as I love CDs, 9 out of 10 times I prefer the vinyl, depending on the mastering. And that's always the case. There's great mastered vinyl records and terrible ones, same with CDs. But this sounded really good. And I was surprised how good the alternates were. And I totally forgot how funky they were as a band. I always remember later, again, with the African players and the other bass players and Tony Levin and, the expanded Talking Heads on later records, they're just so full and so rich and have these wonderful worldly music sounds, very percussive too. And I always loved that thickness and, of course, that tenor voice of David Byrne, with background singers later on as well. And this, though, is a funky record, and it's a tight record and a well-recorded record. In the book here, I didn't realize one of the producers the artists at least wanted, but obviously budget-wise they couldn't get, is Willie Mitchell. And Willie Mitchell is the producer who did those great albums by Al Green and Ann Peebles, that kind of funky, soulful stuff. I just, it's obvious listening to it, and I don't know why I didn't remember this record being so funky. Now, not all of it. There's some really out there artsy stuff and some experimental things, but even their experimental stuff gets pulled back. And when you read Tina Weymouth, her essay in here, you realize, they wanted to be for the long run, not necessarily a big hits band. Of course, they became that, especially during the MTV era, but they wanted to keep their creativity. And as you know, they're one of the those bands that kept that creative spark going their entire career. And I would even say later albums like Naked is a wonderful record too. I don't think they've ever made a bad album. And I just love this band. They're one of the great American bands, definitely. So, very successful. But I will say, I went, after I listened to all that, Blu-ray, DVD, or Blu-ray, I should say, the CDs sounded so good. I pulled out my original. I tell you, this kicked ass. Mine's a very clean copy. Look how wonderful this is. I mean, no wear, nothing. I keep my records in tip top most of the time, not all the time, but this one definitely. It survived my 95 purge. The vinyl has the edge for me. However, if I didn't have this version, this is killer. And if I didn't play this version, it's kind of like there's a tree. Do you hear a tree falling in the forest if you're not there? Does it make a sound? If I didn't hear this and just play this would be fantastic. It's amazing. I want to just talk about the Talking Heads a little bit because there are some other things, and talk about design and packaging. There's this set, and talk about one of the more outrageous designed sets in the history of CD sets, with an introduction by David Frick, who was at Rolling Stone, and a great essayist, writer. It is Talking Heads Once in a Lifetime. This thing. Where do you keep this thing? This artwork is incredible. I keep it leaning on the ledge of my CD wall there. I'm a freak for these design things, but this is totally one of the strangest designs I have in terms of compact disc packaging that came out during the heyday. And it's not their entire catalog. It's a selection. It's a deep dive, which I like. So it has, some rarities, some hits, and a deep dive, very much like I just showed that Orb video a few days ago, that Orb collection with a beautiful packaging, where it has a lot of different things mixed in. Same with the Smiths, Louder Than Bombs, the Doors, weirder scenes from that one, the double one. But this just has some really cool artwork. I believe this was designed, I think, by M & Company, amazing design firm in the 80s and 90s. I don't think he's longer with us, but just really well done. Very hard to handle, very hard to display, very hard to look and read. A total strange format, but you're going to see it because I love showing it. Also a timeline of the band that goes through it too. So, posters like the CBGB's posters, things like that. A wonderful set, amazing set. But you need the space for it. Long out of print, I believe. And then they did, which I never got, they did a full catalog CD, that white kind of 3D textured, I think it was rubberized cube. Not the Orb, but a cube. Like the Borg in a way. The Borg, of course you know what the Borg is. I never got that, and I understand it's very good, and I don't have that. I have separate CDs of the Talking Heads. But this is fabulous. Now, in 78, I saw them again, as I said, and that would have been at the boarding house. And I just want to talk about that in closing, because that was the tour of More Songs About Building and Food. A wonderful record, of course. This really you saw their development really changing this following year. And look at this cover. And of course, the Warner Brothers rep who came into my store gave me this puzzle. I have it now in one of those record frames. But I want to tell you, at some point during a move or someone coming to my house, I used to have this on like a dresser all put together. There's 2 pieces missing, 2 or 3 pieces, looks like 2 pieces. So I want to just throw it out there. If anyone comes across these pieces, please reach out to me, because I'm missing the 2 pieces. But I guess it could be looked at as an art aesthetic. It's almost like Chuck Close's work, Chuck Close, the artist. I don't think this is Chuck Close. I should have looked. But I love this. This is kind of a wonderful promo piece. I love all these kind of promo things, especially in the 70s and 80s that record companies would design and give out, not sell as merch. This was not that. This was gimmicks. And I'll just throw this out there. Remember this one? Robert Rauschenberg, the artist, did this cover. I'm surprised. It always faded. All these are faded, turned yellow, plastics, speaking in tongues. I don't play this copy. I have a regular copy. This isn't an expensive record. You can get it, I mean, relatively. You think that over the years this would have turned into be a collectible. It is a collectible, but it's not a big money collectible, which is fine. I just want it because of the artist's work, the artistry of it. It's almost like color separations and printing, but pretty cool ass design. So that's it, the Talking Head 77. There is also apparently a 4LP with some 45s, several 45s, larger box that has everything here. Obviously, you don't need to duplicate and have any kind of Blu-ray things because that kind of emulates what's on the CDs. But it's 4 LPs. It covers, I think, 2 of the LPs are the live CBGB's concert, and then you have the proper album remixed, or remastered, excuse me, not remixed, remastered, and you have the outtakes or alternative tracks that were left on the cutting room floor. And you realize in some of those versions, you hear the horns more that I recall. I hear some horns a little bit in the background on the final album, but the horns are stronger. I think it was a smart thing not using in the horns and not making it that big production. They were a tight band. They were that kind of the punk ethos, even though they weren't a punk band. So by adding all this extra stuff, I think would have taken away from the essence. They sound like a really tight live band, and it sounds like the way it was recorded, mostly live, and then overdubbing vocals and some guitar parts and things. Very much like the Replacements and like those bands that would come later. But Talking Head 77 from Rhino Records in this interesting book. Check it out. Thanks for watching. Mazzy loves you.